Thank you. That last paper on intuitionistic linear logic is actually one of my favorites. So the plot develops slowly, but I like the ending. So this picture reminds me of a kind of distant vision I had when I was 16 of the internet. It has this kind of optimism and nice blue light. And maybe some of you have had this dream of the internet at some point as well, of the kind of great thing it was going to bring to society. I certainly wasn't the first person. This is a fresco by Raphael in 1511, and it's called the School of Athens. It has philosophers, scientists, and different thinkers and intellectuals, all sharing a space, talking together, sharing ideas. And the thing that's particularly interesting about this painting is that these people were never in the same place at the same time. And that's, in a way, what's interesting about the internet. It breaks down the barriers of space and time. We can have a conversation over great distances when one person is sleeping and the other is awake. But there's a couple of strange things about this picture. One of them is that the gender and racial diversity is not that great. We could put that down to history, perhaps. But there's something else here that's particularly notable. These people are all sharing their different points of view, and it looks really lovely. They look thoughtful, kind, they're listening to each other. But my experience of conversations on the internet is not like that. And so perhaps, this is a more accurate picture of the internet. And perhaps you should have been laughing at me right at the beginning as I suggested the other one. Unfortunately, it's often worse than that. Journalists are threatened into silence. People are harassed into suicide. If you don't agree, you can be put in prison, or you can be shouted out of the forum. Intolerance online leads to, and is sometimes organized, to result in ethnic violence. So it's a very, very dark situation in many places as well. The 2017 harassment survey from Pew observed that 27% of people have refrained from posting online after witnessing the harassment of others. 13% of people have stopped from using an online service altogether, and 41% have been personally subject to online harassment. And perhaps partially because of this, various news organizations have been turning off the comments. This is worth thinking about. Maybe some of you have had to make this decision. These are organizations like yours dedicated to sharing understanding, to having a global debate about the things that matter most, and turning off the capacity to do so. And that's really worrying. So that was, in some sense, my inspiration for what can we do. And that's very dark, and the desire to have good discussions is not a new one. So I guess the question is then, why am I here? And it was given away a little bit earlier on. What is new? What might change some of the way that this game unfolds? So one of the things that people spend a lot of time talking about right now, which I spent my PhD and a good chunk of time over the last 7 years working on, is artificial intelligence. And the particular area that has been making the headlines recently is machine learning. So machine learning is the ability for machines to find patterns in data. And deep learning refers to the capacity to find much more complex patterns in data. And so an example of what I mean by finding pattern in data is you might show a machine many, many examples of pictures. Half of them have cats perhaps in them and half don't. And over time, the machine slowly learns to recognize what the patterns in the pixels are that correspond to there being a cat in the picture. And we say the machine has learned to recognize cats. So that's deep learning. So we might ask, what has it got to do with conversations? So the interesting thing about machine learning for conversations is that the ability to understand what is in text is also growing. Deep machine learning lets us find more in text than we might have been able to find before. Perhaps it would be able to help someone before they post a comment, a bit like a friend who they've invited, say, I'm not sure about sending this email, would you have a read of it? They go, well, you're making very light of a very serious topic. You maybe want to take out silly joke at the beginning. Or maybe if English isn't your first language, you might not understand when someone writes to you, good luck with your presentation, break a leg. You'll be like, I don't want to break my legs on my presentation, that sounds terrible. In British English, that's an expression wishing someone good luck. So this kind of capacity, what if machines could understand the emotional impact of the comment you were writing? What if they could say, that comment you're writing is going to make the person feel bad, you're undermining their role here. So those characteristics, that ability for machines to perhaps understand some of the emotional aspects of language, is the bit that I think is very exciting. And you might be, wait a minute, Lucas, you're crazy. We've been reading science fiction, and we know that emotions are the last place that robots are going to get to. We know that's the foundation of humanity. And maybe, and I'll give you an argument, and then I'll show you some examples as to why that has actually backwards, and why it actually may be that robots are going to be emotional before they're smart, and that the real risks of artificial intelligence are not that it is too smart, but that it is too dumb. So, the argument. Animals and people both develop some emotional understanding before language, before they can understand language, and before they can do logic puzzles. So, why should machines' intelligence evolve differently? So that's an interesting question to consider. And if you want, we can have more of a discussion about it later. But while you hold on that thought, we'll say, well, okay, what if we take for granted that maybe machines can understand some of the emotional impact of language, and what would we then do with it? So this is the topic that I have been working on for a while, machine learning to support better conversations. And let me tell you a bit about what that might mean. So the first thing we might do with machine learning is if we can identify when someone is attacking someone online, when there is a personal attack, perhaps we can then start to understand the big-scale patterns in this, start to understand some of the dynamics of human interaction. When does the attention that we've got from someone end up manifesting in a negative, problematic experience that perhaps reinforces their filter bubble? So which way around here? On the left-hand side, this is a visualization from Wired using the comments submitted to Discuss, which is one of those plug-in sections for comments at the bottom of news sites. And this is the time of day. So, and the time of day is indicated by the arrow of that, the gray bars. The darkness of the gray bar is how toxic those conversations are. So what we see here, and the length of the bar is how many comments happen at that time of day. So what we see is, 8 in the morning, that bar is quite light gray. There's not very many toxic comments at all then, but there's a lot of comments that start happening. You get down to about midday, there's lots of comments. You get close to after work, and things start to get a bit darker. And then you get to 4 in the morning, and things are quite terrible. About 11% of comments submitted at 4 in the morning. If you're thinking about writing that comment at 4 in the morning tonight, think about it again. On the other side, that's an interesting insight that we learn about the nature of when we write comments and how we might want to respect people's attention in that act. On the other side, we have a graph from a paper that I did, which looks at a percentage of comments that are attacking other people by the editor's activity level. This is contributions to Wikipedia, and we see that nearly 30% of the personal attacks on Wikipedia are by contributors who've made over 100 contributions. These are regular parts of the community attacking other people. So one of the questions that was often raised is, maybe the problem with attacks is just people coming in and, it's not about the regular people who have a reputation. That seems to not be the case here. So there's other kinds of insights. Another one that I think is very interesting is called the bad day hypothesis, which is a real question about where and why do people write bad comments. And actually, I'll come to that in a second. But before I do that, and the reason I'll come back in a second is to say, well, that's all very nice. We've talked about what we might learn about bad comments. Well, what might we do about it? So there's 3 kinds of things we might do about it. One of them is we might build tools for people who are already in the role of helping facilitate the discussion. I was very glad to hear about the role and the concept in the previous talk of Leo's about the nature of engagement with commenters, that it should be like a dinner party, right? And there's people who help that happen. in many, many comment sections. Sometimes they just remove the bad stuff. That's one kind of comment moderation. Often they jump into the conversation. They go, wait, no, maybe you've misunderstood what they were saying. We know this very well from things like conflict resolution. On the other side, of course, there's authors, the people writing. What if we could give feedback to the person who's writing so that perhaps they would think again and think differently about the way they're writing? And then why do we even have to have this dichotomy to begin with? Most of the time, people are spent the time reading comments. Perhaps they're the people who should be empowered with the choice about the values and the way they want to engage in the comments. So let's look at a few examples. So this is not animated. And that's OK, because I'll just talk to it. This is an interface we built with the New York Times. It's a comment moderation tool. And the key thing about it is it uses machine learning scores to be able to sort the comments by the likelihood that they'll be accepted, the likelihood that they'll be inflammatory, the likelihood that they'll be off-topic, these kind of characteristics. By sorting it and reviewing them in a sorted order, the New York Times was able to and actually, it does two things. So one of them, it sorts it, and the second one is it highlights in a section in bold which part of the comment might be the issue if it's going to be rejected. So perhaps, perhaps you've experienced this if you've ever moderated comments. You can have someone make quite a cogent point, but at the end, they kind of just get to the point where they're annoyed, and they just finish their comment with an angry, F you. And if you have a moderation policy where you're saying, no screaming curse words at your dinner party, then you're going to remove that comment. But they did make quite a good point the rest of the time. So isn't that a shame? But instead of having to read the whole comment, now you could just jump to the bit and go, oh, OK, I see it's one of those. So these things together have managed to allow the New York Times to go from comments on 10% of their newspaper to 30%. And it's allowed them to keep comments open from used to be 4 hours to 24 hours. So it's a very big difference in the amount of comments that they can engage with. So this is a project that we did with Wikimedia, where we look at all of the comments in the discussions on Wikipedia pages. And in an individual day, there is between 10 and 20,000 in the English Wikipedia. And here we visualize the red dots as the personal attacks or the toxic comments that are still up on Wikipedia. And the gray dots are the ones that have been removed. Wikipedia has a very specific policy on personal attacks. So, they have explicitly said that's not part of their discussion. So perhaps we could build a tool that would gamify the interaction and help people go in and go, let me check. The machine will make mistakes, so some of these are not personal attacks, and some personal attacks are missed. But we might be able to create games that help people make the community be the community that they want it to be. This is what I was talking about with viewers. If you are reading the comments, some days, so first of all, I should caveat this. I lived in Scotland and grew up there, and there's a culture of banter. So in a pub, it's often an enjoyable activity to insult each other. This may sound silly, but it's something we like doing. And you go there for playful insults. Online, sometimes, that's also a fun thing. That's a thing that people sometimes do. They like to see what's the most creative, fun insult. But sometimes you're not in the mood for that. Sometimes you're like, I just want to read the actual substance. Where's the real point that's here? Sometimes, 1,000 comments saying, awesome video. You're like, yeah, I got it. You like the video. But where was the one that said, oh, wait, go to 3 minutes in, look at the background here. Look at the symbolism of the relationship between the background and the initial scene in the movie. Isn't that fascinating? Right? Where are the comments like that? They're there, but they're harder to find. So perhaps we could give the viewer the control for what they want to look at today. So we can make things like sliders, which say, what do you want to read comments like, they have their heads up their ass or that kind of thing? Or perhaps today you're not in the mood for that. Machine learning makes that possible. The other kind of thing is authorship. And this is another one where there's no video. As you're typing, we can give you direct feedback. You can try it out yourself, perspectiveapi.com. This is, we can give you feedback as you're typing to let you know. This is the concept of authorship. So this is what can be done today. And for me, that gives me some hope that we might be able to do a lot better in the ways we interact online. We might be able to really help people. But what about the challenges? So let's look at them. There's three big classes of challenges. One of them is context. There's a picture of a pig there, and what a fat pig. Yeah, that's a really fat pig. But that comment would be very different if it's on a YouTube video where someone is perhaps coming out for the first time or talking about their struggle with eating. Context does matter. It's really important, and it changes the nature of the impact of a comment. And context isn't just what video is attached to, it's also the social context. Am I in that pub in Scotland, or am I at a dinner party talking about something totally different? So what happens when your machine learning doesn't have the right context? It makes mistakes. So we have to, at some level, perhaps embrace some amount of mistakes. We have to design for mistakes. And we have to design, and once you caveat that, you also realize there's many situations where context doesn't have that much effect. It's easy to imagine context changing things, but it doesn't always. Of course, another challenge is truth versus subjectivity. Is a comment really toxic? Is that really something that you can say? Does that have an epistemological truth to it? Or is it subjective? If it's subjective, different people think different things, and that's true. And so for what's the result of machine learning? The machine learning tells you something like, of the people that who've given feedback, this many are likely to say that this comment is going to make them feel unwelcome in the community. And then, of course, machines get things wrong. They have biases you do not intend. Most of the challenges in machine learning don't come from the engineers going, I want this kind of bias in my machine learning. They're accidental. They come from the raw underlying data. So for example, comments that contain the word gay online in English, by far and large, are horrible. But what's the result of that? The result of that, if the machine learning algorithms are looking at this and you're showing them many examples of comments, that word, the machine learning algorithm is going to go, okay, it's that word that's the problem. But it's wrong, because it's never seen examples of comments with the word gay that are good. You have to make sure that the underlying things are right. So again, you have to think about what is the way that the machine learning is going to be applied. There are applications where the unintended biases can end up with a benefit for the group who's biased towards. There are also cases where it will be detrimental. The last thing I'd like to do is give a little bit of a call to data. So right now, most data lives with big platforms. Each individual publisher has a small amount of data as well. But unless we make more data, and when I'm talking about data here, let me be clear, I'm not talking about user data. Here we're talking about examples of comments. I think it's very important to take away the user data here because it causes all sorts of problems. It isn't that useful for machine learning, and you can do a lot more with just the comment text that people have asked to make public. So, having said that, if we can take different bits of examples, we make them public, we create a public good that can be shared between news organizations. And what's the impact of that? We did a little competition of this recently. We made an open source data set under a Creative Commons license and created what's called a Kaggle competition to bring machine learning researchers to try and help solve the problem of toxic comments online. And there we had 4,500 teams participate. That's a lot of machine learning researchers putting their time into having better discussions. People are really excited about making the internet a better place. They're really excited about trying to engage in better discussions, and that's something which you cannot take the benefit of unless you can provide the kinds of comments that your news organization wants to the researchers and engage with industry. That mixture is, I think, what is needed here. Otherwise, we end up with all of the comment data being in the hands of a rather small number of tech players. So, the promise of the internet. I hope I've given a little bit of hope before lunch, sparked. Thank you for your attention. I think there is a really important problem here. If we cannot have good discussions at scale, we cannot make good decisions at scale. If we continue to have bad discussions, we reinforce the polarization in the world, the filter bubbles that we struggle with. And unless we can have better discussions, we cannot really even use each other's attention respectfully. So with that, I'll end my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. What I really like about your talk as the fourth talk is that now I think we really had 4 very different perspectives on today's motto, and they all come together so nicely. Like you could see certain ideas pop up again and again, but from a different point of view, so that's really nice. Thank you. Do we have questions for Lucas? Yes, right in the back. And oh, there's another one. Okay, microphones running.
Hi. So thank you for all those insights, and I know you're here for Jigsaw, but I mean, Google is facing all those problems with its own platforms. So can you maybe say anything about, like, YouTube comments are like shit, like they're really, really bad most of the time. So can you maybe say anything about like how YouTube is implementing all those tools you develop?
Yeah, sure. So YouTube actually has a feature, I think people should know about it more, which is based on the kinds of machine learning tools that we've done applied specifically to YouTube, which is every channel owner can turn on a withhold likely problematic comments, I think it's called likely offensive comments, for review. So this means that you can help make sure that you get the attention of who's helping you with your YouTube channel on the comments that are most likely to be offensive. They are very much looking at, there's another thing that they're looking at, it's how do we enable there to be higher quality comments? Rather than sort comments chronologically, which results in, first comment type, great comments, you can actually sort it by aspects of quality. We've just sent a paper for review on how do we identify constructive comments. And actually, we've worked with the New York Times and built classifiers, which you can use today, which help you identify good comments. So these are the things that YouTube and other properties in Google are working on. I think it's very, very important for them too. It's a big platform, and it's an important space of discussion.
We had more questions here in the... yeah.
Yeah, your last answer was already half of my question, so I try to put it in other words. Quality of discussions or quality of comment sections. What you have shown in your slide deck was, again, a list of comments, and you said you can now sort that list under different aspects, like time or quality things. Do you also research for other possibilities to structure? Because a list is definitely not what a reader wants. Yeah? And as a reader, I want to dive deeper on a topic or dive deeper on a certain aspect. So I don't need a list for that, because then I need to read the whole list, right?
Absolutely. So that, just to help you get the sense, there's 2 aspects to that list view. One was for moderators. That's the one that improves the efficiency of moderators. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right. What actually is the structure of comments that helps people? That's a big aspect of our research. It's actually where I started from. I started off looking at the structural aspects of conversation, and then I realized I was missing the emotional. So then we've invested significantly into the emotional aspects. With respect to the structural, there's quite a few things that are appearing now. The ability to identify comments which are making a similar kind of point is something that has just been released through Google APIs. And it's starting to become a commonplace tech. That revolutionizes the way we can structure comments. We can think about automatically suggesting where they go in the article. We can think about grouping them together. We can think about the narrative aspects. We can break them into clusters. There's thousands of very important and good things to be done in this space.
We can talk about this later, because we are also doing research on that.
You can do that during lunch break. I'm going to point you out. But we have another question. No? Sorry? Okay. But, there, over there. First lunch couples already. That's awesome.
Well, you were talking about some challenges, and I was actually wondering how you deal with what I was seeing as the most challenging thing, that machine cannot answer a comment as a journalist can. Because, I think that when we talk about comments, it's not only about hiding a comment or not, but actually about getting into touch, answering questions that readers have, talk to them. Like, this cannot be handled by a machine like it can be handled by a journalist, right?
Yes, and I wouldn't want it to be either. That would make a much, much scarier place. Luckily, machines are still far, far too dumb to even contemplate that in a reasonable way. But there is 2 things that can be done that are interesting. One of them is to help people realize when the comment has already been answered somewhere else by the journalist. perhaps in the article. Sometimes, amazingly, people don't read the article they're commenting on. Who would have thought? And the other one, perhaps even more interesting, and it gets to the aspect of structure of conversation, is we can find the places to bring the journalist in. If there's 5 or 6 comments on this area, we can have extra information like, hey, you wrote this article, you have probably the most insights about this, right? You've dedicated a significant amount of your time to understanding it. This is a really interesting thing that the readers want to know. That engagement itself, I think, is critical for the future of news, right? News needs to be a place where we are engaging on the most important things in the world around us and in our lives. That's the aspect of it with which it balances democracy and it supports society. So I think that your question is fantastic because that is the thing. How do we really use the machines both to make people more human with each other and to bring people's attention to the right places so that you really can have an engagement between the journalist? For me, the machines are about the facilitation of the human interaction. The human interaction is what's important.
Okay, if we don't have any questions anymore, you can still raise your hand.
They might be hungry.
Yeah, they might be. Okay, so I'm just going to say thank you to you and introduce them to the lunch. Thank you so much.